My name is Nikhil Vaswani, and I'm a junior consultant at Turner & Townsend. And today we're very kindly joined by Matt Robinson, co-founder and CEO of GetZero, and Raja Naveed, managing director at EEH Solutions. The purpose of this event is a retrofit information support and expertise event, which is fully funded by the Department of Energy Security and Net Zero and is delivered by Turner & Townsend. Once again, I'd like to thank everyone for joining, and I will now hand over to both Matt and Raja for today's presentation on building your retrofit supply chain. Over to you, Matt and Raja.
Thanks very much, and welcome to everyone. We appreciate you showing up. I hope you have got at least a cup of tea, if not a sandwich, with you for this lunchtime session. So what we're going to cover today is really kind of an overview of the market for green jobs. We're going to look particularly about what that means for retrofit, talk about some of the challenges and opportunities in building up the workforce for retrofit, some of which mirror kind of broader challenges with green jobs in general, some of which are more specific. And then kind of in the second part of the presentation element of today, we'll be having Raja talk to his experience of having delivered under the Social Housing Decarbonisation Fund, talk about some of the challenges, the opportunities, and what he's learned from how to improve the supply chain. We'll just end with the final slide on places you can go for further help. But yeah, certainly we're looking for this to be as kind of interactive as possible. And whenever you have questions, then please put them in. So just a quick introduction. Again, Matt Robinson, I'm Chief Executive Officer of GetZero. We're a digital education platform fundamentally focused on green skills and providing people career guidance towards how they can start working to support the transition to net zero. Raja, would you like to quickly introduce yourself?
Yes, of course. Yeah. Hi, I'm Raja Naveed. I'm the Managing Director of EEH. I'm also a co-founder. We are a retrofit contractor based in the southeast of England, and we have predominantly been doing EWI, and we consider ourselves as EWI specialists, but we do a wide range of EM measures, all within PAS 2030 and PAS 2035. But I will be giving you a bit more of a background as far as what we've experienced as far as the SHDF over the last 18 months, and maybe some tips that could be used for, I guess, the wider industry.
Wonderful. Okay, let's jump into it. So just start off with just kind of what is a green job, because it's a term that's used increasingly now, but it's worthwhile just kind of level setting what we mean by this. So there is kind of an official definition, and there's a long journey to how this official definition came about for those who are interested. But in essence, the Office of National Statistics, the ONS, have landed on this one. It's kind of a broad description of kind of any activity, any economic activity where it leads to jobs to either protect or restore the environment, and they've made that specifically including actions to mitigate and mitigate climate change, which of course is what a lot of the work in green jobs, particularly in terms of retrofit, are about. But they're about other things as well, which we'll talk about. In terms of a more useful way to think about green jobs, I think firstly, they kind of fit into three broad groups, and it's quite useful to think of them either in this first group, which is kind of the greenest bucket, if you like, which is the new and emerging jobs which are emerging to support these net zero activities. Examples in retrofit include retrofit assessors and coordinators. And then we've got the middle group, which is where there are existing jobs, but there's additional skills required in order to perform those jobs in this new green world. Heating engineers are a good example of that. And also, I think, we talk about what Raja's work is about. That's installation work, and it's done to the higher standards required for retrofit. And of course, we just simply need more people to do jobs that exist now. Again, in retrofit, you can think about the work that's created for plasterers and renderers as we retrofit all these properties. And you've probably heard this on other masterclasses, but there's kind of usually kind of an estimate of 26 million houses that need to be retrofitted before 2050 to meet our net zero obligations and to help us avoid the kind of impacts on the environment that come from not decarbonising quick enough. I will quickly mention that a lot of what I'm going to talk about today is a summary of things that are in a report that we recently released on the journey to green jobs, which was done in coordination, collaboration with the 5% Club, who, if you haven't come across it, are a nationwide organisation for companies and other employers that supply apprenticeship programs. And we really wanted to look at kind of where are green jobs at the moment. And I think what's quite interesting, in addition to kind of looking at, there's quite a few reports already out there, and we spent some time looking at those to understand where the market is generally, but also talking to people who kind of are already on the journey, already looking at what do they need in terms of green skills and green jobs. And I think the final point I'd make is, green jobs and green skills, the concept's only really important if it's useful for you. And if it's something that helps you think through, well, due to these new types of work that we're doing to support net zero, like retrofit, what are the jobs or what are the skills that are required for that, and where are we on the journey to acquiring or building up our workforce to meet that? And of course, in the context of the supply chain, kind of what's the kind of skills that are to spread across the supply chain, and are we collectively able to meet that demand? So let's kind of look briefly at the current market for green jobs, and it's one of these areas where we often talk about the green skills gap, and we have three numbers at the top here, which are a way of spelling that out. Green jobs have increased, nearly sevenfold since 2019, and there's some more interesting data from LinkedIn recently showing this rise of green jobs, and these are jobs which require at least one green skill for people to apply for those jobs on the LinkedIn platform, for example. And if you look at the other side, most workers in the UK currently don't have a green skill. So because of where we're coming from, these are skills that generally people don't have. And then often we talk about, well, maybe young people can be part of the answer to this, and maybe they can help fill this green skills gap. One of the problems is that these jobs aren't necessarily jobs that they're aware of or interested in. A great study that came out of the Prince's Trust at the back end of last year showed that while having a green job or having a sustainable job is of interest to the majority of young people, it's not in itself enough for them to want to take a job. They are, not surprisingly, probably interested in what's the conditions, what's the pay, what's my progression, what's it going to be like doing this job. So we have to make sure that green jobs fit the pattern of any other job that people think about in terms of how they're going to spend their working lives. So let's quickly touch on what are some of the challenges in the green jobs market. I mean, one of the biggest ones is this thing about the demographics of the workforce. As I think we're all aware, this is a case where this is an aging population, and there's people kind of coming out with the skills of the top end of the workforce, and that's particularly true in construction. And I guess the problem is, again, this kind of attraction of the sector to young people, which means we're not replacing people as they retire. And if those people were candidates to shift from kind of an old non-green job to a new green job, and I guess the examples we've spoken about here is people are moving from boilers to doing heat pumps and other low carbon heating. They're not moving to those jobs en masse at the moment, and we also need to come and get the next generation as they get replaced to do those jobs. There's kind of a mismatch between education and training provision and the market requirements at the moment. We're starting to have some pretty good estimates, as good as estimates can be, of where jobs are required, but the system takes quite a long time to change the skills system, and there's a lot of demands on the skills system, and that's becoming harder to achieve. And there's factors in there as well, such as, first of all, we need to have enough people training and teaching these programs, generally at further education and other vocational skills providers. Until we have more of those, it's the chicken and egg situation. This kind of falls into the pace of reskilling existing workers as well, and that's partly this problem of what's available in the skills environment, but it's also we need a consistent amount of demand so that the existing workers themselves want to get skilled up for these jobs, and the companies that employ them do as well. I think we'll touch on that later. And again, this point, low awareness of green jobs and their benefits, particularly amongst young people. And in the broader kind of market, there's been inadequate policy support for workforce development that fits with a broader trend in the UK. We haven't really looked at vocational jobs seriously for a while, but this is changing. That's one of the things that is a positive, that we are seeing the kind of vocational market, the skills training, getting more emphasis, including kind of from the new government as well. So let's just look at some numbers, and there's various big numbers out there for how many people are going to be employed in green jobs by 2030, and then by 2050 for the net zero target end date. We pulled out these ones because they're kind of hotspots anyway, kind of where a lot of the green jobs are going to be coming in the next 6 years, but also, quite relevant to this discussion around retrofit. 60,000 heat pump installers, which will be retrofit and new homes, or just kind of straight replacement in the existing homes. A large number of people needed for the continued kind of development of our net zero energy capability, much of which is used in the built environment. And then we've got this big number for people performing retrofit jobs, and that is, interestingly, you may have seen other numbers out there which are kind of around the same kind of figure, 250,000 as a total, but a lot of these jobs are those trades related to the actual work on the fabric of the property. So let's kind of look at some of the specific challenges for the retrofit workforce. So part of the problem is just this kind of disaligned supply and demand situation, where it kind of comes and fits and starts. I'm sure we'll hear a bit about that from Roger, but the Social Housing Decarbonisation Fund has certainly provided kind of an uplift in demand, but one of the things we need to do as we kind of expand that scheme and start other schemes is to make sure that there's kind of a kind of more consistent run of demand into the market, which then means people will start courses, then means employers would start taking in more people. I'll quickly mention these. There's some other things specific to retrofit, range of property types, the ownership models, different types of ways of owning property in the UK, the solutions available to do retrofit. So those things mean that we're tending to need to adapt each scheme to fit the nature of the properties within it. There's an interesting range of stakeholders across which affects the supply chain. The supply chain reflects those stakeholders, different types of owners, clients, different types of people involved, different types of local authority involvement, as well as the people doing the actual work in the property, and these new roles which are about assessing and managing the project, the coordinators. And then, of course, we've got this interesting wide range of different skills which are involved in retrofit. And I think this last point is one which came across in the people that I spoke to about retrofit, but it's important that we need to understand that we're doing work that has to be to a consistently high standard to meet the Paris standards, but also because the properties won't be energy efficient, or they won't meet the comfort levels that's required of it. And so that, I guess, frankly, requires us to ensure that in work that's being done in the built environment, it's done to these high standards, and that we kind of have to upskill people to those standards as well as reskilling to do them. Happy to take comments on that afterwards. But let's kind of flip this to the opportunities within retrofit. So first of all, there is growing market demand with funding. I think a really interesting thing for me doing the report was of 8 case studies we featured in it, 4 were firms that are involved in retrofit, are delivering on what was the Social Housing Decarbonisation Fund. This is creating demand in the market. And that feeds through, and it means courses are being created and run to meet that demand. So, the point I'm making there is that within the built environment, the work being done in retrofit is almost the kind of the first mover in the whole green skills agenda. There's national and regional and local resources going in to support this. I mean, just to pick out one example, there's very good facilities being set up in the South London Partnership about helping build the skills system and for retrofit, and that's being replicated in a number of other places. Also, some very good stuff that's going in Wales, in Manchester, and now I'm going to leave out a bunch of people, but who are also doing good work. And I think the national programs will start to follow. I mean, the UK level national programs. And I think that kind of touches on the next point. This UK skills provision in general is lifting, and it will lift up with it the provision of green skills and those that are relevant to retrofit. So there's work going on, for example, to make the apprenticeship scheme, the apprenticeship levy more useful, and just generally around kind of resetting us from kind of a focus on academic education to something where we see it in balance and having at least an equal focus on vocational education. And technology allows us to support skills building. One of the interesting comments in the report was somebody said this is something that allows us to keep people on the job, which is a problem in SMEs. They can't have people come away for long periods of time for reskilling. So technology can support that, and also support doing the work that we're talking about, the digital solutions around, for example, energy management and specifying work. So I'm just going to finish my section with kind of 5 takeaway tips that came from the people in the business that are that responded. And of course, Roger's one of those, so he will emphasize a few of these points. Firstly, it's kind of consistent that people said they use the kind of open available programs as a way to kind of create the baseline of training in their organization. Supply Chain Sustainability School came up regularly here, and they have their kind of retrofit focused modules, which are very worth using to kind of build up this base level. Retrofit gives you an ability to build engagement across the businesses. And again, several respondents said, well, we're using it to get people engaged in the transition to net zero, whereas often that can be kind of perceived as another thing we have to do. And it's, they obviously read things in their papers which might negate the messages they're getting about this transition. But when they see what's actually happening, through taking those training programs and through the work that's being done, and particularly relevant to retrofit, when they see the differences this is making to the life of residents, then that can be a very motivating force which builds engagement and motivation in the workforce. And it was interesting how several people talked about that. Also, common thing was finding people from different backgrounds and approaches to join the workforce and help kind of get over the fact there's a general shortage of people to do this. That was, both kind of reference to diversity inclusion, but also can we just take people who've done other jobs, done other different types of jobs, or come from other kind of academic backgrounds, but they could easily take on a particular job in retrofit, be it controlling the paperwork, for example, or in the design job. Probably the most crucial thing that came out was this need to build collaboration across the supply chain, starting at the beginning to ensure the quality delivery. And I know that's going to come up next, so I'm not going to say more on that. Develop innovative approaches to current gaps in formal education. So I think that was kind of, the final thing I thought was really useful was, yes, we recognise that the skills system hasn't caught up yet. For example, there aren't kind of apprenticeship programs specifically around these green jobs, around these jobs for retrofit at the moment. So we will create our own education system. We'll use kind of baseline skills training, add on the green elements. We will learn from the work we're doing and make sure that when we do these projects, these schemes, that we've kind of saved that knowledge and make that readily available to other people as they do their work. Okay, so hopefully those pointers are useful. I do encourage people to go to the report, read it through, and particularly just go to the case studies if you're interested in these firms. But let me hand over now to Roger to kind of really get to that experience of what it's like to deliver in the retrofit market.
Thank you, Matt. That was great. A lot of good points you raised there, and I'll be going over some of them in my part now. So, as the slide says, this is about my experience. Well, should I say EEH's experience delivering under the SHDF. Now, we've got a bit of a background of working within the retrofit schemes over the last 4 years. We've worked across the southeast in multiple other schemes. So a lot of our skills and experience that we've developed as a firm has come from past experience, and some of the challenges that we saw under SHDF were almost new to us and uncharted territory really for us, because we're working with large organizations like tier one contractors, with the clients themselves and their design teams, whereas the other schemes were predominantly you're working with a managing agent, and you're kind of given a job as a turnkey solution and you go in there. But there was, of course, complexities with that model as well. But looking more so on the SHDF in general, what we found was that a lot about what Matt's spoken about, I think firstly I need to mention is that it's about developing this robust supply chain. There is a lot of risks for the supply chain, I guess, in developing skills and retaining staff, and there's ongoing challenges with that. But focusing first on, I mean, we'll get to some of them further on, but let's start off with the SHTF. We've worked with several tier one contractors, and we were kind of given a bit of an introduction into what was expected. And usually, what we were allocated work were we were given jobs in batches, and we then had to check stuff like suitability, archetypes, planning status, location, EPC data, and condition reports. Now, that sounds like that should be quite straightforward, looking at it from a contractor's perspective. However, what we found was that wasn't necessarily the case. Now, we found that there was challenges actually looking through each aspect of those. Now, we were kind of taking it on as an approach saying, well, I'm sure somebody has reviewed this. The information and data we're receiving has been looked at by, several people within a hierarchy, should we say, from the client down to designers to the tier ones, and then within our own internal teams. Now, what we carried out was we carried out technical surveys, building inspections, both on-site and desktop surveys. And what we found was actually a lot of this data was incorrect to start with. Either it was old data, it wasn't classified property, properties that were classified as solid wall were actually cavity wall, or properties that were classified as, homes or houses were actually masonettes. So we found that, planning was a problem. We found properties within conservation areas where there were masonettes, we required planning permission. And then there was a challenge. And what that meant is it had a knock-on effect for the rest of the program, because um, you know, essentially the program was then ripped up and we have to start all over again. So we can move to the next slide, I think, from here. If that's okay, Matt. Thank you. So what we found was the issues we faced there was because of a knowledge gap, and this knowledge gap was between the operation teams from the tier one and the client, as well as the design teams. Now, what the communication was, I think, the main barrier to start with, because they weren't all really communicating with one another. There was a lack of, I would say, collaboration, and that discussion wasn't really happening. What was happening was everything was being passed down. I guess the hierarchy, so being passed down in stages, and there wasn't really anybody in between that was reviewing the information until it got to us. So when it did get to us, what we found was operations were, communication within the operation wasn't prioritized. It was kind of seen as that, you should be just getting on with this, but it meant sequencing was all over the place. There was no, well, there was an absence of a centralized portal where, all the information was provided to us. So we could share information. It almost felt like we were doing it in an old-fashioned way where information was kind of just sent by email from one member to another member of the project teams. And we were actually putting all this information together. Now, with the designs and logistics of it, this was part of a wider problem with the scheduling, I guess, because all these tabs represent, I guess, a wider problem that we had because we were unable to use a definitive program because the designs were sent to us by information that the designer was getting from the retrofit assessment contractor. The designers or the coordinators were then using that information to work out a program. However, the communication wasn't going backwards; it was always going only down the chain. So when it came to us reviewing the information, we found that there was concerns that we had, namely because of building regs or maybe because of warranties. So we couldn't create a definitive program. Now, what that meant was we were having to send back a lot of this information, and it created delays for others within the sequence. So it could be the roofing contractors, it could be the scaffolding contractors. Um, it just created conflict, and that conflict was all because of a poor communication between each teams, well, all the various subcontractors and contractors, and it created a additional complexity which we weren't used to. So what we kind of decided was that okay, well, there is no program. How can we bring in some solutions to this? So what we realized was that we needed to go back to some of the basics as far as project management was concerned. So we looked at the Reba stages and we looked at, well, how can we implement the Reba stages and use technology to essentially create a workflow, and that workflow could then essentially help adapt a process that we have internally that we could go back to various members of the project delivery team and essentially get the answers we need in order to get to a point we can start delivering because the execution is key, and without the execution you know we were just chasing our tail. And what we found was once we'd got past some of these barriers, we found that the scheduling, was over a very short period of, notice periods. So um, that meant we had to find, really quick, fast solutions to problems that we were facing on a day-to-day basis. And our relationships started to kind of, the conflict meant that the relationships were all over the place because we're trying to assist everyone within the sequence of works. Um, so a strategy really needed to be put into place for this because we had issues for commercial teams, relationships with our stakeholders, logistics. The supply chain themselves were inexperienced. They didn't know a lot about PAS. They didn't know about what we had to do as far as the requirements under PAS and building control. It was kind of lost and kind of assumed a lot of this would happen anyway. Um, but what we found was that that knowledge gap had to go back to the teams themselves, down to the most smallest and basic kind of things, such as weather conditions. These weren't looked at, they weren't considered when these operations were or programs were being created or these batches were being handed out. They weren't considering the low temperatures. We were working under temperatures as much as -10, during December 2023, in a remote village, you know, and the logistics were just all over the place. We were working in 4 different regions, all at the same place, with the same contractor, and the sequencing was just all over the place, and it meant we needed to take some control. Um, we had to think of solutions for how we can create a schedule internally that we could then process back to the tier one or process back to the client in order to create a smoother delivery, and the strategy to start with was really start slow. So it it seemed like the strategy was a bit of a reactive approach. Oh no, we've really got to deliver this. We've got to deliver 50 houses by the end of this month or next month. And there was always uncertainty and delays in getting those batches. So we didn't know when we would get the batches. When we did receive the batches, we had to review them, make sure that they were suitable, and it meant that there was a really clear objective for us. We couldn't really plan our logistics well because the locations of the sites were all over the place. Um, the areas we were working in, delivery vehicles couldn't go out to them, and we had to order material, long before they arrive on site. So those short notice periods just weren't working for us. Unable to access certain roads because the lorries were too large. Um, Difficulty in finding areas to store skips and material. Um, and it meant that we were then causing a delay for other members of the supply chain. And um, it meant variations were required. It meant there was maybe planned maintenance going on for a different scheme, which was nothing to do with the SHDF, that was being delayed. And we had to look at areas outside of just the SHDF. We had challenges in working out how much labor we needed to mobilize. Did we need to train more staff? Did we have enough staff? Is our staff available? Do we have the operatives available to deliver this? And I think working, at retrofit at scale, I think one of the things that we realized was that the stakeholders are also the residents in the area. Looking at not just the residents where we're doing the work, but looking at the neighbors, looking at those communities, looking at what's in close proximity. Is there schools? Is there nurseries? Who are we disrupting? We want to show that this work is being delivered professionally. It's being delivered for the great good of not just for the resident, but for that community. And it meant that we were having to adapt almost on a daily basis or weekly basis to the challenges we faced. And residents really didn't know what to expect or when to expect us. So that meant we were finding solutions to help with these programs because we moved to some mechanical rendering. So using pumps to render because of the program periods and the time frames, we were struggling to notify neighbors and residents and creating a program on when we could deliver. It meant we needed a solution that we could do something within the same day because nobody wanted to hear these generators going off, for weeks and weeks at a time. So we were creating programs for, when we could deliver on the rendering side. So these generators weren't humming away, making noise in the area, and causing additional complexity. Um, but one of the other challenges we saw was that a lot of the tier ones, the teams that are working on the tier ones and on the client side, they came from maintenance backgrounds, and their approach to the SHDF was more of looking at it as well. This is just another maintenance program, which is correct in a way, but they didn't really understand the complexities of it and the number of trades that were involved, especially with EWI. We've got 7 different trades that are involved with just EWI itself, and managing that labor and all those trades and making sure that it's sequenced in the right times. It just wasn't understood, and that caused, I guess, some sort of conflict within the project management teams, and we had to overcome them. So, moving on maybe to the next slide. So some of the areas I've highlighted, we talked about communication, And we looked at some really basic and simple ways that we could resolve these solutions, that were simple and everyone could do quite easily. So we moved over to creating like WhatsApp groups for individual teams, and we included the tier ones within one of the groups. So that way there was no misunderstanding, and we could get things done real time. Messages were being shared across the team on both sides. So whoever can get to that issue, or if there's an issue that needed to be addressed quite quickly, we could address those. And talking about the neighbors and the community, I guess itself, we had some best practice that we use on our own installations that we've done over the last 3 4 years, which was when we were working in a different area, what we would do is we would send letters out and we would inform the residents in the area, and we'd usually inform all the residents within close proximity with a contact number for a person of contact, an email address, if there was any concerns or issues that they could contact. But because we were delivering on behalf of a tier one, we passed that on to the tier one, and we said, look, we believe you should take this on and inform the residents and neighbors, and that way we can create a sequence of events per project. So we moved to getting the jobs into a smaller batch of 50, and then delivering those as 5 a week or 10 a week, depending on size and volume. And we were looking at weather conditions and everything. But we could then inform residents that, look, could you please move your vehicles away on this day because we're expecting deliveries, or we're doing rendering on this particular day, just to avoid any damage to any personal belongings that they may have. But it was a way for us to keep everyone engaged on what was happening in the area, so it wasn't kind of seen as something new, because as you know, those communities, they all have their own little resident groups and they all talk to one another, and it was just about making sure that we were kind of respecting their area too. um, but one of the biggest things we did was collaborate with the other members of the supply chain, and sitting down and actually saying, well, let's all go on site together. Let's all work out a way to talk to each other to avoid some of these conflicts that we're facing and some of the delays we're facing. Is there a way we can work together to help smoothen the process and smoothen the delivery? And so what we identified was, for us personally, for the EWI, we had a scaffolding team which was subcontracted and a roofing team which was subcontracted. Um, and we had the design team as well as the project management team and the site team from the tier one. We all met on site. We walked around different archetypes, different properties, look at some of the problems that we faced and we could overcome. And we've smoothened over what could have taken weeks and weeks to resolve. We done it in one afternoon, and everyone was happy, and it meant that we could deliver, say, 25 30 installations that month for EWI, and we're talking about somewhere between 3,000 and 4,000 square meters. So we were able to adopt that into the process, and we found quite basic solutions to that were considered innovative, but these were something that were already there. Looking at different ways to use the scaffolding, different approaches, looking at different details that we could use for the roofing details, and also sequencing the roofing works prior to us arriving on site. Um, there was no real agreement as to when the EWI should have been done or when the roofing was to be done. So we figured out that the roofing needed to be done prior to us coming on site in order to ensure that the system was encapsulated. And it also meant we could do some of the other aspects of our installation, such as the pull-out tests and other things. But I'll move on. We also adopted, like I mentioned earlier, about mechanical spraying. This was so that we could bring in a product that was on a shelf somewhere that wasn't used. We could bring that back in, create a rough cast to match what was already pre-existing on the property, to avoid any planning applications, to avoid those delays that we saw within the Reba stages. So we could bring that all forward and say, well, we can deliver these straight away. We use Weber wall brick to match the brick, the brick details and the rough cast with the Weber M1. So we use that to create, some of these great case studies that we can share that, almost look like they're in keeping, and well, they are in keeping, but it was to make sure that we avoided those delays. Again, with specifications, this is very similar to the last point, and as I mentioned earlier about the rendering plans and schedule days, this helped create, really in these states where it was really difficult to get information across to the residents, because the problem was the tier ones, they weren't really to blame for this, because the client didn't have the batches ready, design teams didn't have it ready, so we were having to kind of work on site to get through these solutions. Should we move to the next slide, Matt? I know we're running out on time, I guess. So I think this is the last slide. I hope you're all enjoying your sandwiches and lunch, but yeah.
We should give people a few minutes for questions. So I think if you pick up the key points.
I'll pick up on these. Yeah. So some of this is quite self-explanatory. So we understood that there were challenges with designs and requiring adaptations and variations. So we found ways to kind of get around this. So we worked out looking at how we could program this into their window program, looking at how we could create window brackets that could essentially be installed on the EWI, and then the window program could go in afterwards. We looked at creating hybrid solutions like working within heritage areas and conservation areas. We looked at bringing in diaphanite, which is a product called Agatherm, and we actually sprayed that. I believe it's the first 2 properties ever done in the UK, and we worked with the manufacturer over in Greece to bring that product here and actually install that, and we layered this over some time to get it approved by Heritage. And I think we've talked about the efficiencies as far as the program itself was concerned, looking at alternative methods on delivering. And then looking at the team structure, we expanded our own internal team. We brought in project managers, we brought in project coordinators, inspectors and QSs to help with the project team from the tier one, so that they could work hand in hand and to create those inefficiencies that we face at the start could be diminished, and using technology and using our own project management software, fluid management software, to actually create efficiencies within our delivery time. So I've just lost that last one. Sorry, Matt, I've just gone. Yeah, thank you. Sorry. And then, site management, we looked at how we could, enhance our site delivery and execute, more effectively, so we can go into a property and come out quicker. We were installing EWI within a 3 to 4 day time window, but where we were actually on site. So we managed to get that, to quite a fast pace, and that we could essentially be on site just for a week per installation, doing both the enabling and re-enabling and the installation itself, but it was all weather dependent. And then, like I mentioned, we've developed a design specific for scaffolding with our scaffolding teams and supplier. We also, this is a bit of a quirky one. We had a bit of an issue with mobile welfare facilities. Well, welfare facilities at the start, because we were working in multiple areas. We realised that having a mobile welfare facility which could move around, and it could also be used as, a on-site office, I guess, so that we could talk about any delays we have, and also make sure that our operatives were, had those facilities available within close proximity, which actually helped us when we were delivering 50, 60 properties at a time. And we had, at any one time, 40 to 50 operatives on site on an individual day. And it proved to be really effective. I think we can move on to the last slide, I believe. I think, Matt, I could pass you back over to you now, I guess, isn't it?
Yeah. Absolutely. Thanks.
Yeah.
Wonderful. Actually, that's a really great kind of I guess, building a picture of what you've been doing with the supply chain, and these steps you've taken to make it more effective. So just to end with this, these are kind of things that we suggest as next steps. There's actually a lot of these recorded in the Green Jobs report that I mentioned earlier with active links. And we can send you that afterwards. So just a few things which are some of the resources that I think are good go-to resources. We mentioned Supply Chain Sustainability School, National Retrofit Hub have done a huge amount of very good work, including around workforces. There's a very good mapping of skills and occupations and qualifications for retrofit. Local resources, there's hubs across London which support green skills, but wherever you're based, then effectively, if you Google for Net Zero Hub or Green Skills Hub, then you will find something in your area. And I think going and talking to further education colleges, the tutors are interested in this thing. A lot of them are very engaged. And then there's professional bodies and the networks with other providers. There's kind of some really strong networks and industry bodies working on this that are worth trying to talk to people in your area. And then, of course, you've got your RISE support manager as well.